The wedding reception was everything I expected. Perfectly polished, a blur of white and gold, and the constant hum of champagne glasses clinking together. But it was also everything I feared. There I was, standing in the corner of the room with my parents, who were busy talking to anyone but me. Dad was already deep in conversation with Ben's new in-laws. And Mom was fawning over Natalie's dress, of course. They didn't notice the subtle way I faded into the background. I should have felt happy for Ben. This was a big moment for him. But all I could think about was the irony of it. I'd spent the last year working my ass off to make the company merger happen, all while Ben was busy with wedding plans, looking good in front of the cameras. And yet, here I was, quietly fading into the shadows of their carefully curated family portrait. It wasn't like anyone noticed anyway. I'd worked through the nights, ran endless meetings, handled every detail so they could focus on the fun stuff, like this damn wedding. But no one cared. Ben was the hero of the day, and even my parents seemed more interested in the idea of having a successful son than acknowledging the work I put in. Then, I overheard Natalie talking to one of her friends. She was standing by the buffet laughing, but her voice carried across the room. I just don't get why Emily thinks she's so involved. She's not even that important, you know? The sting hit me so fast I could barely catch my breath. I stayed still, pretending not to hear, but my skin burned with the insult. My brother's new wife didn't even have the decency to keep her opinion to herself. I could feel my jaw tighten, but I kept my mouth shut. What was the point? My dad wouldn't care. He'd brush it off like he always did. And Mom? She'd probably make some excuse about Natalie being nervous or something, like she always did, whenever anyone treated me like I didn't matter. I wasn't about to make a scene. I wasn't even going to confront her about it, but the feeling in my chest, the one that felt like a knot pulling tighter with every passing second, it wasn't going away. It was only growing stronger, and I knew this time would be different. The next time I spoke, I wouldn't be invisible anymore. I was done being the one who worked in the background while everyone else took credit. I could feel it then, this quiet, unshakable resolve starting to form in me. It was time to show them that I was the one who held the power here. The show would be over soon enough, and I'd be the one in control. I just had to figure out how to make them see it. I walked into the reception hall before anyone else had arrived, just like I knew I would. The soft hum of the band testing their instruments barely registered in my mind. I was trying, I guess, to act like nothing was wrong, trying to hold on to the last thread of respect I had left for them. But deep down, I knew I was going to be ignored. It wasn't even a question anymore. It was just part of the routine. I made my way past the high-top tables and the sparkling centerpiece flowers that probably cost more than my rent. The guest list was up on a giant board by the entrance, framed in gold like they were announcing some royal decree. My name was tucked in the corner at the back of the room, right next to a table full of waitstaff and catering assistants. No one important. Not even close. I didn't have to look at the seating chart for more than a second to know exactly what it meant. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a mistake. They wanted me there, out of the way, blending in with the rest of the invisible people. Ben's table was up front, of course, right next to Natalie and her family. My parents? They were hovering around the center of the room, talking to every important person in sight, except for me, as usual. I could already feel the old familiar burn behind my eyes, but I didn't give in to it. I didn't protest. I didn't ask for a change. I didn't say anything because what would be the point? Instead, I took my seat at the back table, the one where I belonged, apparently. It was a little too small, a little too far from the action, and the tablecloths were already starting to look a little wrinkled. I settled in quietly, folding my hands neatly in my lap. The low hum of the party started to fill the space around me, and I realized just how sharp the contrast was. How out of place I was among the laughter, the music, the life of the party. I didn't let it show. Not a single muscle in my face twitched. But inside I felt the sting of being left out, of being discarded. I could feel it pressing down on me, that old feeling I couldn't shake no matter how hard I tried. The worst part was that I didn't have to say anything. They had already told me everything I needed to know with that seating chart. I had been invisible in my own family for so long. Now it was official. They saw me as a tool, someone to be used when necessary, but not worthy of being seen or heard. And I knew it wasn't just about the wedding. This was about everything: the company, the work I'd done, the sacrifices I'd made while Ben played the golden boy. They saw me as irrelevant, even though I was the one who held the damn thing together. I felt the weight of the insult settle in my chest, but I kept my eyes on the table, not looking up. I wasn't going to make a scene. Not here, not now. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me react. I'd learned long ago that no one cared about the quiet ones, the ones who didn't demand attention. But that didn't mean I didn't see it. I saw everything. I just sat there, my back straight, as the room filled with the clinking of glasses and the sound of the band warming up. The discomfort was there, but I was learning how to live with it. The rage? That was starting to simmer beneath the surface, waiting for its moment. I wasn't going to fight for a seat at their table. No, I was going to make my own damn table. And when the time was right, they'd all know exactly what it felt like to be ignored, to be dismissed. I pulled my phone out from my bag, my fingers steady despite the buzz of tension running through me. The screen lit up, and without even thinking, I dialed my assistant's number. I didn't need to explain. I didn't need to say much. My mind was clear, the decision already made. I felt nothing. Well, not nothing, more like a cold, calm certainty. Like I'd just set something in motion that couldn't be undone. There was no turning back now. I tucked my phone back into my bag and stood up. No one even glanced my way. My seat at the back by the staff had served its purpose. I had been invisible, unnoticed. Now it was my turn to be the one watching, the one pulling the strings. I walked through the crowd with deliberate steps, my heels clicking against the polished floor, a quiet beat against the louder voices. A few people turned to look, a flicker of curiosity crossing their faces, but I ignored them. I wasn't there to be a part of their conversations anymore. I wasn't there to be included. I had made my decision, and I was ready to leave the room, to step away from this family of mine. As I passed him, my gaze caught his. I could see the slight flash of recognition in his eyes, but it didn't last long. It never did. He didn't even know what I'd just done. He didn't even know how close he was to losing everything he thought he'd built. That was the thing. Ben had always been the one in the spotlight, the one everyone expected to succeed. But it was never him behind the scenes, making the real decisions. I had been the one making this company work, the one holding it all together while he coasted along, playing the role of the heir. He had no idea how fragile everything was, how one decision could bring it all down. And that decision had already been made. I didn't feel the rush of satisfaction I thought I might. There was no gloating. I wasn't angry anymore, just clear, focused. I took one last glance at Ben. He was still talking, still unaware. I could almost feel the weight of it, the impending crash that was coming for him. But I didn't pity him, not anymore. He hadn't earned my respect, and I wasn't about to give him the benefit of a warning. The doors to the reception hall loomed in front of me, and I stepped out into the cool air, finally alone. The weight of the world felt lighter now, like I had just taken control of my own life in a way I hadn't dared to before. The anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but now it was a tool, a means to an end. I had learned how to use it. I knew the chaos would hit soon enough, but for now, I walked away from it all with a strange peace. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was the one holding the cards, and they wouldn't even see me coming. I stepped into the cool night air, the weight of the decision still sitting in my chest like a stone. My heart was thudding, but it wasn't from fear. It was a mixture of anger and something else, satisfaction maybe, a sense of finality. I was done playing the background role, done being invisible. As I slid into my car and slammed the door shut, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out without hesitation. It was my assistant. The contract's canceled. It's all done, the voice on the other end said, calm, efficient. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Good, I said. My voice was steady, even though my insides were a swirl of cold excitement and quiet rage. Let me know if anything changes. The phone call ended, and I stared at the screen for a moment longer. My family had no idea. They wouldn't understand yet. But the storm was coming. I could feel it in my bones. I shoved the phone back into my bag and let my head fall against the headrest. The drive back to the estate felt like it took forever. I couldn't stop thinking about everything that had led up to this moment. The years I'd spent building the company, quietly pushing it forward, while Ben took the credit, while my parents acted like I didn't even exist unless they needed something. It had been enough, more than enough. As soon as I walked through the door of the estate, the phone calls started coming in. Ben, Natalie, one after another. I let the calls ring out, knowing that they were desperately trying to reach me, that they had no idea what I'd just done. They wouldn't for a while. I didn't pick up. Not for them. Not for anyone. I spent the night alone, the silence of the house wrapping around me like a heavy blanket. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. The weight of my decision was there, but it wasn't overwhelming. It felt right. It had to be done. They'd been taking me for granted for too long. I'd spent my life proving my worth, working behind the scenes, only to be tossed aside like an afterthought. They didn't get to do that anymore. I could hear the faint sound of my phone buzzing in the other room, but I didn't move. I didn't care what they had to say. The consequences of my actions were just beginning to unfold, but I was calm. The world might fall apart for them, but I was finally in control. The next morning, the first ripple hit. The phone calls came faster now, the panic starting to bleed through. My family didn't understand why a deal that they thought was a sure thing had suddenly fallen through. It was only beginning, and by the time they realized who was behind it, it would be too late. I didn't pick up, not once. I could almost picture Ben scrambling, trying to put the pieces back together. He'd have no clue. They never did. All he knew was that his shiny new business deal, the one he was so proud of, was slipping through his fingers, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. I could feel the knot of satisfaction tighten in my chest. I wasn't happy in the way people would think. I wasn't out to destroy anyone. But I was done being the invisible one, the one who worked tirelessly while everyone else took the credit. Today was the start of something new, and for the first time in years, I could breathe. It was just a week later when my lawyer called. I had expected something like this, but hearing it out loud still hit like a punch to the gut. The company is facing significant losses, Emily. The canceled contract was the linchpin for the merger. Without it, they're in real trouble. Your family, well, they're not going to be able to bounce back as easily as they thought. I pressed my fingers to my forehead, trying to absorb the weight of his words. The company was already spiraling, but hearing it laid out like this, it was more than I'd expected. I had always known how much power I held over the business, but to realize the full extent of it, how my one decision had shattered everything they'd built, was sobering. I didn't feel guilt. Not really. But I couldn't ignore the realization that this wasn't just about my family's future anymore. It was bigger than that. I had unknowingly set off a chain reaction that could affect more people than I could count. Employees, investors, partners. They would all feel the fallout. Still, the anger I'd carried for years wasn't gone. It hadn't disappeared. It just sat, simmering, behind the cold certainty that what I'd done was the right choice for me. But as I reflected on the years of my own sacrifice, the countless nights I spent keeping everything from falling apart, all while Ben strutted around like the golden child, I couldn't help but feel the sting again. I had worked harder, been more dedicated, more loyal than anyone. But when it came time to take credit, Ben was the one everyone praised. I thought back to the countless meetings where my ideas had been dismissed, the late nights when I worked through the numbers, fine-tuning every detail, while Ben and my parents waltzed around as if the company's success was all theirs. It had always been the same, over and over. They only saw me as an asset when they needed something from me. When things were running smoothly, I was invisible, and now they were paying for it. I sat in the silence of my apartment, the weight of it pressing down on me, the phone calls and emails from my family left unanswered. But this time, I wasn't hiding. I wasn't the one trying to make peace. I was watching them crash, and I wasn't about to step in and save them. Later that week, I found myself at the board meeting. My absence didn't go unnoticed. Ben was there, as usual, flanked by Natalie and the company execs, but there was something different this time. The air in the room felt thicker. I could see it in the way they spoke, the way they avoided eye contact with each other. The panic was starting to show. The same execs who used to look to me for direction were now casting furtive glances at each other, their voices low as they whispered about the situation. Ben, looking every bit the part of a leader, was trying to keep it together. His voice was steady, but there was a tremor in it. Something off, like the ground was starting to crack beneath him. He was going over the numbers, attempting to make a plan, but no one seemed to believe it was going to work. I stayed in the back of the room, just outside the circle, watching it all unfold. I didn't have to say a word. Ben and his team were scrambling, trying to save face, trying to spin this disaster into something they could manage. They had no idea what had really happened. No clue that I was the one who had torn the rug out from under them. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. But then I remembered all those years of my work being ignored, of my efforts being dismissed, and the feeling passed. No one had ever asked what I thought. No one had ever cared about what I could do. Now they were seeing it, how much I had been holding together without anyone noticing, how I had been the one really running things behind the scenes. But I wasn't going to intervene. Not yet. The damage had been done. Let them figure it out. Let them realize, on their own, that I was the one who had made it all work. I stayed quiet, distant. And as I watched them stumble through the meeting, I knew it wouldn't be long before they figured out who the real architect of their success had been. By then, it wouldn't matter. I had already made my choice. And now, I was ready to let them face the consequences. The media had made Ben and Natalie's engagement into a spectacle, calling them the new power couple, a perfect blend of business acumen and glamour. It was supposed to be a fairy tale, right? The kind of story everyone loved to watch unfold in glossy magazines and social media posts. But I knew better. It wasn't love. It was a business deal, a strategy, a way for them to solidify their hold on the company. And it was working. The invitation to the pre-wedding dinner arrived like clockwork, a polite gesture wrapped in a thin layer of manipulation. Family unity, they called it. I knew what they really meant. They needed my signature to finalize the merger. They needed me to play my part and sign off on the deal that would save everything. Everything except me. They saw me as a tool to be used, not as someone who mattered in her own right. I showed up anyway, not because I had to, but because I was curious to see just how far they were willing to go to use me. The dinner was being held at one of the city's upscale restaurants, the kind where the tables were spaced just far enough apart to make sure everyone could pretend they were in their own private world. But the undercurrent of tension was thick, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the moment when they could manipulate me into doing what they wanted. I slipped into the chair at the end of the table, quietly, keeping my distance. Ben and Natalie were seated next to each other, of course, their smiles practiced, like they were playing the role of the perfect couple. Her father, Robert, a towering figure in the investment world, was at the head of the table, his sharp eyes scanning the room like he was looking for weaknesses. The guy had controlling interest in the company, and he wasn't shy about reminding everyone who held the power. As the evening unfolded, it became more and more obvious why I was there. The conversation shifted between small talk and business, but it was the business talk that had the real weight. Every few minutes, someone would bring up the deal, the merger, the one they were all scrambling to finalize. "Emily, we're so glad you could join us," Natalie said, her voice sweet but laced with an edge I couldn't ignore. "It's really important that we're all on the same page. You've been such an integral part of everything, and we want to make sure you're comfortable with how things are going." She was doing it again, pretending she cared about my opinion, about how I felt. But I knew what this was. She didn't care about me. She cared about the damn merger, and my signature was the missing piece. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "I'm just here to enjoy the dinner," I replied, my tone as even as I could manage. I wasn't giving them the satisfaction of showing how much I saw through their little game. Robert chimed in from the end of the table, his voice smooth, calculated. "We all want what's best for the company. Your approval, Emily, is crucial in getting this deal through. We're counting on you to sign off, of course." I forced a tight smile. "Of course," I said, like it was nothing. Like I hadn't been the one keeping this business afloat while they all played at being power players. But they kept pushing. The whole dinner felt like a slow, drawn-out dance, where everyone was trying to coax me into agreeing, trying to make me feel like part of their family again, as if I didn't already know exactly what they were doing. They were all pretending to care about me, pretending to care about my feelings. But their eyes kept flicking to me in the way that said, "We need you to sign. This is your role, Emily. Do your part and the rest of us can keep playing our parts." The pressure built with each word that passed between them. But I wasn't playing their game anymore. I wasn't going to be the silent puppet, the one they could pull on the strings whenever they needed something. I kept my focus on the glass of wine in front of me, not allowing myself to get drawn into their conversations. Every word, every gesture, every attempt to steer the conversation back to business just cemented it for me. They were using me. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. I excused myself early, not bothering to make a scene, but not giving anyone a chance to convince me otherwise. I could hear them whispering behind me, talking about how they needed my signature, how they hoped I'd come around. But I wasn't listening. I had made my mental note. This time, they weren't going to manipulate me. The thing was, they still didn't get it. They thought they had control. They thought they could use me like they always had. But that's not how it worked anymore. As I walked out the door, I knew they were going to try again. They'd keep trying, keep pushing until they got what they wanted. But I was done playing their game. This time, it was my turn. The morning of the wedding, I could feel my patience wearing thin. It had been building for weeks, all the small manipulations, the half sentences, the subtle pushes toward the inevitable. And today, they were going to get their moment. I was sure of it. But I had one more thing I needed to see before I left for the ceremony. I grabbed my phone, checking it one last time before heading out the door. That's when I saw it. A new email, flagged with an urgent subject line. It was from Natalie. At first, I didn't think much of it, but then I opened it. It was an email meant for Ben, but she'd accidentally forwarded it to me. She probably hadn't meant for me to see it, but I didn't care. As soon as I read the first few lines, everything clicked into place. The email detailed their plans, Ben, Natalie, and the rest of their little team of manipulators. Once I signed off on the merger, the deal would go through. But that was just the beginning. Afterward, after I'd done my part, they were going to push me out of the company entirely. No more Emily, no more helper behind the scenes. I would be nothing but a footnote in their new empire. The sting hit harder than I expected, even though I had suspected it all along. They had been using me all this time, treating me like a tool, never considering me anything more than the quiet one who could get things done when they needed it. They wanted my signature, my approval, so they could pull the rug out from under me once they no longer needed me. It made sense now. They thought they had me figured out. But it wasn't going to happen. Not like they thought. I stood there for a moment, phone in hand, feeling the weight of it all, the years of being sidelined, being overlooked, being the person no one thought twice about. And yet I had held everything together. They'd just never given me credit. But now I knew exactly how I was going to handle it. I shoved the phone back in my purse and took a deep breath. Today was going to be the final act of this whole charade. I arrived at the wedding with the same practiced smile I had used for years, the one that masked everything. Inside, I was cold, quiet, and steady. But outside, I played the part. I greeted people, exchanged pleasantries, and sat through the ceremony like a spectator. Like I was just another face in the crowd, but I wasn't. I wasn't just a guest. I was watching everything unfold, knowing what was coming next. Afterward, at the reception, Ben gave his speech. He was glowing, standing at the center of the room, his voice warm as he thanked everyone for being there. He talked about his leadership, about how his marriage to Natalie was the key to saving the company, how they were going to build something great together. He was the hero, the shining knight in this story, saving the company with his vision and drive. I almost laughed. The only thing he was saving was his own skin. I sat there listening to his self-congratulatory speech, every word feeling like a slap in the face. I kept my smile tight, my hands resting calmly in my lap. But inside, the rage was bubbling. The sense of betrayal was suffocating. This was all part of their game, part of the story they had woven to make Ben the star, to make him the hero in their narrative. And I was just the invisible one, the one they thought they could dispose of once they got what they wanted. But they were wrong. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what I was going to do. They had underestimated me, treated me like a pawn in their game. thinking they could control me with a signature and a smile. But they hadn't realized I was the one who had been holding everything together all along. As the speech went on, I looked around the room, at the faces of all the people who didn't know what was coming. They were all eating it up, the image of the perfect family, the perfect couple, the perfect future. But none of them knew the truth. None of them knew that I was the one pulling the strings now. And I was ready to make the next move. The clinking of glasses, the low hum of conversation, and the laughter from across the room all faded into the background as I stepped away from the reception. I needed a moment of quiet, a moment to make sure that the choice I was about to make wasn't just an impulse, but the final step in taking back control of everything. I found a corner by the coat check, far enough away from the chaos of the reception hall. My heart was steady, my mind clear. There was no hesitation now. They thought they had me figured out, thought they could play me, control me, push me out once they were done using me. But they had no idea what was coming. I pulled my phone from my purse and dialed my assistant's number. "Cancel the merger," I said, the words coming out easy, like I had been rehearsing them for years. No exceptions. It's done. There was no pause, no hesitation on the other end. "Understood." "It's done," came the response, quick and firm. I ended the call, the weight of the decision settling into the pit of my stomach. There was no going back now. I took a deep breath, the cool air of the hallway a stark contrast to the warmth of the reception. I pulled up my email and typed out a quick message to the board of directors, the one final piece of the puzzle. Subject: withdrawal of approval. Dear board members, I am formally withdrawing my approval for the merger as previously discussed. Please consider this the final decision on the matter. Regards, Emily. I hit send, then stood there for a moment, looking at the screen as if it might somehow change the course of everything I had just set in motion. But I didn't feel a rush of satisfaction, like I thought I would. No, it was something quieter, something more like peace. Finally, I was the one making the decisions. Finally, I wasn't just a footnote in the family story. I could feel the shift immediately. The fallout was like a slow-motion car crash. In the next few minutes, I knew that the board would start scrambling, the investors would start pulling out, the stock price would plummet. The company was going to fall apart. And Ben had no idea what was about to hit him. I slipped back into the reception room, pretending to be just another guest, part of the crowd. As the weight of what I had done began to settle in, Ben was still up front, chatting away, his hand resting possessively on Natalie's shoulder as they posed for pictures. He had no clue that his entire empire was crumbling. No idea that in the next few hours, he would lose everything he thought he had built. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. The ripple effect was already in motion. The calls would start flooding in. The meetings would begin. But I wasn't going to be there for any of it. They would have to deal with it on their own. I didn't feel a rush of triumph. There was no sense of gloating in watching them fall apart. I'd spent too long being the one who kept everything together while they took the credit. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't a victory in the way they would have seen it. This was me finally deciding that I mattered, that I wasn't going to let them use me any longer. I wasn't going to be their pawn. As the night went on, I stayed in the background, watching the cracks begin to show. The room was full of people still caught up in the glow of celebration, but I could see the panic starting to seep in. The whispers, the phone calls being made, the frantic energy in the air. It was all happening, just like I knew it would. Ben, with his smile and his speeches, would never understand what had just happened. But I didn't care anymore. For the first time in years, I felt like I was truly in control. And that was all that mattered. In the weeks that followed, the fallout from the collapse was impossible to ignore. The calls started coming in, some from familiar voices, some from people I hadn't spoken to in years, former business partners, investors, people who had always kept their distance when things were running smoothly, now reached out to me, some apologizing, others thanking me for the lessons they had learned. They knew the truth. They knew who had kept the ship afloat all along. It was strange hearing those words. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated, but mostly it felt like nothing more than a final acknowledgement of what I had always known. The company was in ruins, and they were all scrambling to pick up the pieces. But none of them mattered anymore. I had made my choice. I wasn't going back. Not to the family business, not to that world where I was always just a footnote. Instead, I poured myself into building something new, something entirely my own. The shift was almost immediate. I started investing in my own ventures, projects that felt like they were mine from the start. It wasn't fast and it wasn't easy, but it felt real. I had learned so much from the years of working behind the scenes, quietly pushing things forward without anyone noticing. Now I could use all of that knowledge, all that experience, to create something that wasn't tethered to anyone else's idea of success. In the beginning, it was just small moves, an investment here, a partnership there, but it began to add up. Slowly, steadily, I built my own foundation. I wasn't looking for approval from anyone, least of all from the family I had left behind. They kept trying to reach me, calls, emails, messages. They apologized, they pleaded for me to come back, to help them fix the mess they were in. But I ignored every single one. They had made their choices, and I had made mine. One morning, a few months later, I stood in my new office, looking out over the city. It was small, nothing compared to what I had left behind, but it was mine. I could see the skyline stretching out in front of me, the morning light catching the glass of the buildings below. And for the first time, it felt like I was looking at my future. Not the one that had been handed to me, not the one I had been expected to accept, but the one I was going to create for myself. I smiled to myself, feeling that quiet triumph settle into my chest. I had been dismissed for years, underestimated, ignored. But now I was in control. I was building something that would last, something that would carry my name. I wasn't a background player anymore. I was the architect of my own success. The family would have to find their way without me. They had their empire, but I was ready to define my own legacy. And it wasn't going to be anything like the one they had expected.